Okay, sounds great. Yeah, super excited to have Alexis here today, and I will kick it over to her to lead us in what's supposed to be a very interesting and engaged session. So go ahead, Alexis.
Well, hi all. My name is Alexis Bonnell. Let me go ahead and get Zoom savvy here. As you can imagine at Google, I am not always using Zoom, so I want to make sure I'm doing this correctly. So, Kate, am I presenting?
You are presenting.
Yay, look at that, y'all. I already conquered technology hurdle number one. Well, it's so nice to meet you all. And part of why I'm most excited to be here is because, like many of you, I was a public servant for 20 years. And my last job, I was the chief innovation officer at a federal agency. And one of the things that I really was really frustrated by is I felt like technology was always either a lot of hype or a lot of, kind of disappointment. And then I was also in meetings where there'd be some really interesting elements of technology, but someone would say something like, but what about security? But what about privacy? And no one kind of had answers to that. So I was lucky enough about a year and a half ago for Google to look to hire me. And really what I do, and the reason I came over is I wanted to learn for myself, like what's real, what's hype, what's a $200 million problem, what's a $2,000 problem, and really be able to digest and translate back to fellow public servants, the role of this technology, how I navigate it, and things like that. But most importantly, what I love is that I really just exist as a resource, to any of you who are thinking about, kind of that new technology leadership journey, what might be right or not right for you. I am not a salesperson. I don't sell tech. It's really to help people navigate, whether the technology is a good fit or could be helpful to their mission. So I give you a little bit of that as background, just so that I have so much empathy and so much appreciation for what it is to be a public servant. You have some of the best, but also hardest jobs. And so my goal today is to help you learn this the way that I learned it. I did not know anything more about AI than probably many of you just a year and a half ago, 2 years ago. So I'm going to share what I learned in hopes that, you can also feel just a little bit more confident, a little like less mystification around AI, if that works. If you have questions, as we mentioned, please put it in chat. If you agree, disagree, this is all about learning together. So feel free also to put comments, put reflections. I really want to learn from you as well. So with that being said, I want you to put in chat, what is it that you notice about this photo? So this is just, folks waiting, arrived at a train station, waiting, going on to their next thing. What are you noticing? Anything unique? Anything unusual? Very white, very male. Yes, that is definitely true. I'm going to show you the next slide. They look up exactly. Alexis, the other Alexis who's here, not me. You're brilliant because, yep, this is kind of what it would look like now, right? And the reason I highlight this for you is thinking about this idea that we really live in an information age, right? And we are both consumers, producers, et cetera, of that information. And as we have more technology, more data flow, a lot of AI and machine learning, so artificial intelligence and machine learning, and we'll talk about both today, is really about the use of this data. And I want us to think about for just 1 minute, what is different, right? What is different from that scene where maybe you were waiting for your ride to pick you up and couldn't immediately, text someone, or you had to look, for a paper map or something like that. So, really quickly, I wanted to, yeah, exactly, Sarah, all the cell phones. I wanted to ask you really quickly, what are some of the things that we used to do that technology now helps us with, right? So I put a couple of obvious examples. We now have cars, we're not in horse and cart. We have, paper maps, or we move from paper maps to, Apple Maps or Google Maps or whatever you use. But what other types of things have changed? Any other kind of examples of, where technology hopefully has made life a little bit better, a little bit more convenient? Encyclopedia, yeah. I mean, the access to information, just think about how phones, absolutely, how democratized information is now, right? And that's, again, a really critical element of AI. Yep, Rudy, so much easier to connect online shopping, love it, really good one. Even curbside, right? I want us to think for a minute, because it's really interesting, about the fact of what would it be like if COVID had happened only 5 years ago? Right? Only 5 years ago, we actually wouldn't have had the data. We wouldn't have had the technology to do curbside. And a lot of that is because of what AI does in the background, in the sense of matching data, bringing data to bear. To be honest, we probably wouldn't even have the COVID vaccines, because COVID vaccines actually used AI technology in order to model them faster than regular vaccine creation. So this is all things that are really, it's an amazing time to kind of be alive and be engaged in this. So the other thing I want us to do, and most importantly, I want to have empathy for you as a public servant, is that it used to be that we were navigating change, kind of in these generational cohorts, right? 86 years between the first industrial revolution and the second, 99 between the second and the third, only 53, right, between last. And now, just recently before COVID, we were at about a 10-year innovation, kind of adaptation cycle. Now we are in a less than 2-year adaptation cycle. So if any of you feel, overwhelmed, everything's changing, it's changing all the time, in this graphic, you're going to see just a few of the things, right, that are changing, that that AI and other types of things are contributing to. And I want to call your attention to kind of the statement on the left, because I think it's really interesting when we think about our role as public servants. And that is at the very last part of that quote, as public servants, we the job of you is actually often to navigate how this change gets incorporated into our nations and our communities and our customer and citizen and constituent experiences, right? So you're in a really interesting position, and that's part of why I love being able to kind of share and demystify this with you, because you're going to probably play a role in figuring out how these types of discoveries are navigated. So to make it really simple, though, here's an example. I don't know how many of you like LeBron or like basketball, but this is just a basic example, of what AI does right now for the NBA. Literally every minute of every game, it is calculating. And a lot of you have probably seen Moneyball, right? You understand kind of how baseball, for example, really moved into a stats-based game. So if you think about it, information is amazing, it's critical, it's powerful. And so even here, we're able to take AI and literally predict before the ball leaves LeBron's hands if it's likely to be a basket or not, to be able to understand whether or not his form is driving risk, right? And even in facial expression, or something we call sentiment, to be able to understand, is he tired? Is he, does he need some, a caffeine boost or some Gatorade, right? So all of these types of things are really amazing if you think about what, AI does. And I'll show you a little bit more of how that works. But the other thing I want us to recognize is sometimes we think about AI as being really exotic, right? And it's actually all around us right now. We experience it. So we talked about a couple examples, but, really importantly, things like, I mentioned things like cybersecurity or spam filters. There is no way, especially with what's going on in the world right now, that, without AI, that we would be able to be fending off a lot of the cyber attacks, cyber crime, and things like that are happening now. For many of you, how many of you have gotten a call? Go ahead and put a +1 in the chat. If you've ever gotten a call from your bank saying, there was some suspicious activity on your credit card. Has anyone gotten that? Yeah. So all that is literally a data information modeling, where, they look at us as AI as a fraud tool, and they say, wow, Judith is buying things in a place Judith doesn't normally buy things, right? Or Judith just bought a Bentley. Judith doesn't buy a lot of Bentleys. This is weird, right? We should go call Judith and make sure everything's okay. But think about the power of that, right? Think about the ability to take a limited set of resources like a fraud team at a bank and really help them use their time, right, in the right way. And part of that is by being able to model where, might it be likely that fraud, or something like that is happening. Another one that's coming up a lot in public service is chatbots or virtual agents, and I'll give you some examples of those. So the other thing that's important to realize, and you don't have to, this is a very busy slide. What I really want you to pay attention to is that when you talk about AI and machine learning, oftentimes you'll hear reference to the cloud, right? And why that's particularly critical is, in essence, the cloud is what allows the scalability of information processing. So the ability to kind of lease information space versus being limited to what you have. And my favorite example of that is the next slide. And that is, I like to think about cloud like you're leasing a car, but at any given moment, you have the exact car you need in your driveway, right? So if you're going on a family vacation, you walk outside and there's an RV. You can fit the whole family, you can tailgate, right? If you're going on a date night, there's a Ferrari, camping, an SUV, et cetera. But that idea of having your technology as a service meet you where you are is really important, just because if you think about AI, it takes a lot of information flow, right? It takes a lot of data. And so that's one of the reasons why when you hear people talk about the cloud is maybe not the destination. The cloud is the start of the journey, right? It's what you can do on the cloud. It's that information flow that makes it powerful. And AI is pretty dependent on the cloud because of the nature and volume of information. I'm going to stop really quickly. Can I get like a +1 or like an amen? Are y'all following me? Is this good so far? Thumbs up in the chat, yeah? Okay, awesome. We will keep going then. So let's define it in a few words. Like anything, everyone is going to tell you it depends, but I've given you the definitions that I like. And what I want you to pay attention to is, number one, this machine learning bubble fits within AI. And we'll talk about like why machine learning is a part of AI. But more importantly, really paying attention to this definition of artificial intelligence. Sometimes people think about it as intelligence. I like to think about it as interpretation, because really what you're asking a computer to do is to perceive something visually, to be able to recognize a word, to be able to translate things. And so that idea of interpretation is critical. And machine learning, the difference is, in essence, what you're trying to do is to get the system to do something without giving it hard and fast rules. And I'll show you a little bit about what that looks like. So imagine like interpreting, but with a little bit of discretion, or what we would call confidence factor. And so when you think about AI and machine learning, there's really 4 categories, that typically takes right now. One is classification. So that might be, if you can imagine you're driving, like, is this a gas station? Is this a grocery store? Is this a restaurant? So if you imagine, how close am I, or how far am I on a road trip somewhere, that is where AI comes in to help you classify. Prediction is really important. And this is one of the areas where I see a lot of public servants really starting to want to lean forward. And for many of you, I'm sure during COVID, there were things where we didn't know the right answer, but we kind of had to game them out, right? We had to model, we had to scenario play. So what I mean by that is, what is 6 feet of social distancing enough? What would happen if it was 10? Or if we open bars or restaurants tomorrow, how likely is our case, going to skyrocket? Or, for example, with climate, if we do X, Y, and Z, will that increase flooding, right? So the reason I highlight this is because if we think about ourselves as public servants and public leaders in an information age, then the ability to take that information and not just respond, but be able to be, and be reactive, but be able to be a little bit proactive, right? And I like to call this like, playing with the what if machine. And one of the things that AI does really well is lets you kind of get in that scenario modeling, like what if machine basis. One of the examples I'd like to use right now is, for example, we're helping different agencies who want to have more diverse talent, right? Who want to have more equity in their programs actually model, if we made this tweak in our program, how many more how many more communities of color would be included or better served, right? So that idea of really being able to ponder and explore with data before you make a specific policy decision is really, really valuable. The third one is generation. And this is where you're using AI to take a known set of information and create new things out of it. So I love the example of generating new musical melodies, right? If you think about Spotify or Pandora, that idea of being able to match music you like with other music, et cetera, that's another kind of form of preference generation. And the final one is understanding. And understanding is really this idea of being able to understand human intent. So, if I said, what's the weather like today, right, to Siri, she understands that what I'm looking for is for her to go and capture, that weather information based on where I am geographically, right, and tell me kind of in whatever format. So I might say tomorrow, right? So if you think about it, she's really looking at a number of different data things and blending them together because she understands that I want weather, right? But it's not, it takes a couple of different pieces of data to give me that. So hopefully that makes sense. And I like to break it down with this slide. So if you think about it, even this one, kind of one function that this person is doing by trying to take a picture of a sign and translate it into maybe the language that they're comfortable with, I've broken down for you at the bottom, a couple of different things are happening, right? The first is that the system is actually recognizing text, right? Or recognizing words. The second is it's actually recognizing an image or a color combination, and taking that image and making it into text. Then it's in essence saying, what language is this text in? And it's recognizing that it's in English, right? And the very last part might be actually translating that to the language of choice. And one of the reasons I like the example of language is because when we think about inclusivity, when we think about equity, right, translation is one of the big elements of AI that a lot of public servants, and a lot of different public organizations really want to start embracing now. So hopefully that's clear. What I'm really trying to show you is that even in one exercise, the machine learning or the AI can be actually doing a number of different functions at the same time. All right, so we talked about classification. When we think about classification, I don't know how many of you also have like Google Photos or something, but if you go into your photos and you notice that it can naturally sort, for example, my Chihuahuas versus my husband, it ironically does not think the Chihuahua and my husband are the same thing, right? That's again because the AI in essence is going and saying, these things look similar and these things look similar, right? And so I automatically have a file of husband photos and a file of Chihuahua photos without doing anything, right? And yeah, and Beth, a great point. Text recognition, has improved exponentially. And this is I'm so glad you brought that up because I was really surprised going from just, my role before into kind of the heart of a technology company on just how much had changed. And I think the place this comes most alive to me is, and we'll talk about this example later, but actually is in that virtual agent, right? Because if you think about it, we used to call into a call center and be like, +1 for this, right? Press 2, and that still exists. But the most modern virtual agents can literally, in fact, we have one state in Illinois that we were doing unemployment insurance claims with, and I'll tell you more about that, but where 90% of the people who were experiencing the chatbot thought they were talking to a human, right? And no one who hears +1, whatever, thinks they're talking to a human, right? So I do think that it's really a great point, Beth, that's really kind of changed. And this is where for us, being curious as public servants, joining things like this, I give you big kudos, to kind of really understand, as I tried to do coming here, what's changed, what's different. So we talked about prediction. One of the things that's been really critical, as you can imagine, is an emergency situation. So I'll show you another example later, but for example, one of them is we do flood prediction. So in Bangladesh, we in essence, there are certain areas that are very prone to flooding, as you can see here. And so we are able to, in essence, look at the weather, take a bunch of other models, topography, height, history of flood, and in essence, help predict for someone, whether or not they're going to be the victim of a flood with incredible accuracy. This goes out to about 63 million people. So again, that ability to be proactive or predictive in ways that before maybe we would find ourselves like, we think it's a bad storm, but we don't know kind of how it's going to impact me, right? So what AI really does is allows you to bring that question of personalization or of like your, specific situation to meet these larger data flows like weather, as an example. So another one is generation. We talked about like generating music. It could also be even, generating well, I'll give you an example later of USPTO, which will be helpful. And then, finally, like language translation again, Google Translate is a great example, but being able to take in, language and translate that. And then finally, this idea of language understanding. So I gave you the example of Siri, or Alexa, being able to, find food, know what it is you're looking for. So these are all different things that machine learning can do. Now, one of the things I want to call your attention to, as you're seeing, is this concept of AlphaGo. And this is something that really woke people up. And so if you're not familiar with Go, it is a game that they say, I think, has been around for over 2,500 years. It's very, very popular in Asia and China and Korea. And it's a little bit, I'm not going to explain it well, but imagine it's similar to maybe chess. You have a certain amount of moves, etc., but it's highly praised and highly valued. And the reason I show you this is because, if AI in essence is interpreting and learning, it was able to take those rules. It was able to watch the very, and learn from the very best human players. And in 0 days, it had no knowledge of the game. In 3 days, it beat the world champion. Okay. And then, as you keep going on, obviously, world master. And then we have the same now with alpha chess. So this is AlphaGo. But the reason I show you this, and this was in 2016, is that when the Chinese government saw the power of AI, right, saw it beat, these incredible grandmaster champions in a game that they so valued, that was actually the turning point. We kind of call it the Sputnik moment for China and AI, where over the next year, they invested over $150 billion in AI, right? But I showed you this because I wanted to point out that sometimes it's these human moments, right, where technology is connected to, what we love or what we do that really makes it come alive, right? And so for the Chinese, this was a particular powerful one. But we're still early in the game, right? So we're just in 2022, but really we expect a huge amount of global GDP growth to be around AI. And really it's around information flow, right? And maximizing information. So how does it work? Most importantly, AI, again, there's no you can ask a bunch of people different technical meanings, but when you start talking about machine learning, in essence, the whole idea is to be able to have the software learn and adapt and not necessarily be confined to rules. And I'll give you an example of that. So how many of you still get spam? +1? No spam out there? +1, +1. All right. How many of you, though, get less spam than you would expect? Hopefully the answer for you, great. Okay, Beth, maybe not, Cassidy, yes. And part of that is because in essence, how we, as a technology kind of cohort, introduced machine learning into spam. And so the way you could think about it is the way that rules-based things work is that you have to set the rule, right? So As an example, I might tell my son, I have a 22-year-old son, when we go to church, I might say, okay, go to church and be quiet, don't be disruptive, and I give him a parameter. So if you think about it, and you think about the fact that humans are really smart, right? Spammers are really smart. They start to do one thing and that doesn't work, they're going to change it up, right? So if you had a rules-based approach, what that meant is you would always be behind, right? Because you would always have to be creating a new rule for some new behavior, right? And the reality is that, you just are never going to win. Humans are super creative. So in essence, that there's a lot of drawbacks on that. So instead, what the machine learning tries to do is it learns patterns from the email. So as an example, if you get an email that says Nigerian prince, it would say, hey, probably in the future, anything that says Nigerian prince or any kind of reference may be spam. And what it tries to do then is to classify the likelihood that something is spam. And over time, and this is really important, this is probably the most important thing, over time, the model is refined, right, to reduce errors. And the reason why I say it's the most important is that AI learns, right? It learns with you. And so what I mean by that is the way that your AI functions. So for example, with the unemployment insurance office with the state of Illinois, if the AI functioned in that chatbot the same way on the 300th day as it did on the first, it'd be really bad AI, right? Because what it should be doing is learning and being like, oh, when someone calls in and asks for, X, or let's say asks for, this is not relevant to this example, but asks for a fishing license, what they need is form 5621, right? And you think about it, there's a little bit of translation between like gov speak, right? And like people speak. And so the AI in essence learns, and what's really interesting is that the AI also tells you more about your customer, right? It can tell you what's the language that my customer actually uses to describe these government things. And then you can go back and adapt your website or adapt, your call center scripts or anything like that, your agents, kind of words to actually reflect more of your customer, right? Versus maybe making your customer learn government, right? Or learn bureaucratic speak. So that's one of the interesting things about AI is, it's really, I think, helpful to embrace it as like a learning tool and one that should learn with you. So it's not enough to kind of set it and forget it. You have to actually be curious with it to get the most value out of it, if that makes sense. And so I'm going to show you something really cool. And I'm going to see, give me 1 second because I'm going to be changing screens. So let's see how well I can do this. I'm also going to be turning off my video because I need to use my camera to show you this. But before I switch it, I want you to take a note and we'll send you afterward this teachable machine because I'm literally going to show you all in about 4 minutes how you can program AI, like Graham, Rudy, Ellen, you all are going to be programming AI in like 3 minutes. Judith, stand by. Here it comes. Okay. So I'm going to stop sharing this. I'm going to screen share again. Hopefully, give me 1 second. Let's see if I can do this. I'm going to share it. I'm going to turn off my video. Now, Kate, can you just confirm for me the teachable machine is up?
We've got it. Yeah.
Awesome. All right. So this is teachable machine. So I'm going to click on getting started, and this is available to any of you. I will tell you, for those of you who have kids, you can keep your kids busy for an entire weekend by just showing them teachable machine. You will have like your niece who wants to model her dance moves off of Beyonce and see how close she got, right? So I'm going to go ahead and pick an image project, and I'm going to pick a standard image. Now I'm going to use my webcam, and I am going to just take some things on my desk. So I'm going to take a tumbler. I don't know if that's what people call it. That's what I call this. And I'm literally going to hold and record a bunch of pictures. I'm just literally clicking hold and record a bunch of pictures of this tumbler. Now, did any of you see me do anything other than take pictures? No, right? I was literally pushing hold to record, picture, picture, picture. Now I'm going to put in another class. And let's say this one is, y'all are going to get to see the vitamins I take. Vitamins. I think I spelled that wrong too. All right. And in essence, you know, just taking a bunch of hair, skin, and nail pictures. That's right. All right. So I could have put in data in a lot of different ways. I could have imported it. I could have loaded a different type of sheet, but I did it, really using my camera in real time the same way you all can. So now I'm clicking train model. So I want you to think about this for a minute. Did I, and put in the chat, did I tell the machine the difference between my hand or my face or the tumbler or the vitamin bottle? No, right? Did I write a single word of code? And I could have taken anything from my desk, right? Someone was just like, oh, I'm not smart enough to program AI, y'all. I'm just showing you how easy this is. So now on the confidence factor here, and this is the important thing I want you to pay attention to. It's going up and down. It's in essence saying, okay, what's our percentage of confidence that what we're seeing is a tumbler versus the vitamin bottle? And you can see that it's kind of going up and down because it's not seeing either of them, right? So it's going like this. Now look and see what happens. So again, I didn't have to tell it what it was. I gave it enough information in those images for it to find and decide for itself kind of the likely area of focus. And I could export this. I could do, any number. I could add another, comparative here. So this is something that, I wanted to show you because it really is that easy, I think, and I'm going to stop sharing and go back to the other screen. It really is kind of incredible where the technology is at now. And the way I think about it, oops, sorry, I have to close out on something. Okay, I can navigate technology, I promise. So the way, that I think about it, or what I think is really interesting is how many of you remember, if I showed a different tumbler, that's an interesting question. It would still recognize the tumbler most likely. Now, if I had two cups and they were pretty much the same cup, but different colors, then it would only be parsing really the color difference, right? But it will take kind of the whole atmospherics of what it sees and start to kind of, again, I didn't give it any rules, right? I didn't say this is a tumbler has to have a handle, right? Or a tumbler has to be this white thing or have a straw out of it. It kind of, made that up on its own. And that's where the learning part comes in. So let me go ahead and share my screen again. Hopefully I do this right. Okay, let me go to my other view. All right, Kate, did I do it? Am I back?
You're brilliant. You're on.
Woo! Okay. I'm going to open my chat so I can see all your great things. So the whole point, and this is what I think is really interesting to Beth's earlier question about, has the technology changed? So I'm going to date myself, but back in the 90s, right, when people, the internet was first happening and people wanted to have a website, that was a really specialty thing, right? It was you had to have only a few website designers existed, and it was super expensive. And now it's if you go and buy a URL, it's do you want a website with this, right? Click and all of that. So the reason why I wanted to show you Teachable Machine is because I think it's important, for you to understand maybe how much easier, how much more intuitive, where the technology is now than maybe where you thought it was. One of the things we hear a lot is, public servants and to be honest, I thought this too. I thought, well, I don't have any data scientists, so I can't use AI, or I don't have enough of them, or I don't have a huge, budget, or my data isn't perfect, right? And again, I just showed you not perfect data, right? No data scientists involved, but I wanted you to, understand kind of how it's changed. And again, is this helpful? +1, is this, am I making this easy? Because that's really my goal. Yeah? Okay, you're all so supportive, thank you. So I want to give you another quick example. I know some of you are from the DMV side, right? So we've gotten to work with a couple different, DMVs in different states and countries even, around how AI plays into that. And so this was one of the questions that they gave us, kind of reimagining the DMV. And so one of the things we did is we in essence broke down and said, okay, here's how technology, but most importantly, AI might play a role, right? So whether that was, doing virtual identity, whether that was actually transactions in a chatbot, whether that was having virtual waiting rooms, right? These are all different things that AI can contribute to. And I think sometimes there's like a nice to have around technology, but sometimes it actually means real bottom line benefits. And so in this case, we were able to model with them, the fact that taking advantage of a few of the different AIs actually would bring them 28 million more dollars of monthly revenue compared to like just being limited to in-person transactions. So, again, I just think sometimes that is helpful to know that it's a nice to have, but also can have real value. Now I'm going to show you a couple of examples because I think it's helpful when you understand how it's being used, right? So in this particular case, we actually had two different instances, or I'll give you two different examples. In one case, we had a state that had an enormous backlog, right, of unemployment and pandemic requests, and they didn't have enough call center staff. I don't know about you all, but I know when I have worked where we, need to have call center, you can't simply add 400 people tomorrow, right? That's just not going to work. It's not going to happen. And so, for many of you, this was probably a challenge you faced, this idea of maybe a growing influx of requests, but not necessarily the ability to simply add FTEs, right? And a virtual agent is in essence a chat bot, but you can escalate to a live agent. So what that might look like is someone might come in, you might come to like a chat area on, let's say, a DMV website and says, hey, what do you want to do today? I want to register my vehicle. Okay, what kind of vehicle do you have? So that back and forth of that information flow, what does the customer want to do? What's the information required? That's all virtual agent, right? If that virtual agent, if part of that back and forth was an escalation, in essence, that's where you could, in essence, get a live agent, right, to take over. But the goal for us is we know it's more successful, or we gauge our success based on how frequently or infrequently an escalation has to occur, right? And the goal here, I think it's really important, isn't about replacing people. It's about figuring out how do the people you have use their time most wisely, right? Or to the most benefit. And a lot of times, if you think about it, there's a certain part of what we're doing on kind of human, interpretation, where a system can say like, yes, I can tell the difference between a cup, and a can. But then there's going to be other levels of discretion. Well, can I put a hot thing in both of those? Maybe, maybe not, right? So there's always going to be that level of diving in a little bit deeper that really you have to have humans or human in the loop decisions. So as an example, if you wanted to detect fraud, you wouldn't use the AI system to say that person is a fraud. What you would in essence say is, here's some information that are giving us some flags where you, human in the loop, may want to look at this, right? Because maybe it's fraud, maybe it's not. But as leaders and public servants, when we think about information, we want to be really intentional to think about, where do I want to have that human making the decision, right? And where can the classification be done, by the machine? And so here, in this particular issue, that state really wanted to make sure, if you imagine unemployment, this is a really scary time for people, right? They lost their job. They may not know how they're paying their bills. And can you imagine the frustration, the fear of calling in and just kind of being like, oh, we're overwhelmed right now. Sorry. Can't help you. Like, these are people's lives, right? And so the state was really intentional. They wanted a minimum, to schedule a callback. They wanted to be able to automate the status, right? Because again, if someone's waiting to pay that rent check, they've got to know, are they a day away from that? Are they a week away from that? But most importantly, too, this is a time of real sensitivity for people. So being able to say, how angry or scared, or let's take the temperature, if you will, of our customer base and be able to be responsive, was also something that the AI could help with. Now, this is one of my favorite examples. Kate, do you need me?
Sorry to jump in. Just a couple questions come in. Could you just remind us all the difference between a chatbot and a virtual agent?
Sure. So, I mean, to be honest, the industry uses both terms fairly interchangeably. A chatbot tends, generally speaking, to be either way. You're going to see it on like your phone, or you're going to see it on the website. You're going to kind of click into it. A chatbot tends to, in essence, maybe be a little bit more simplistic. If you think about like your frequently asked questions, right? A chatbot you can, and actually this is a great point. People think they have to do a lot to start to use AI, for example, in something like a chatbot. If you have frequently asked questions, which you probably all do, already written out, you're like 95% of the way there to just flipping on a chatbot, right? So I would generally say a chatbot is kind of that, kind of frequently asked questions level. A virtual agent is where you might start to be connecting data flows together. So as an example, a chatbot might tell you, here are the hours, or, what documents do I need to register my out-of-state car? A virtual agent may actually go back in and allow you to do some more of that actual transaction, right? Take a picture of your current registration, right? And upload it, in the virtual agent, come back and ask you a particular question. So again, it can be used interchangeably. Sometimes people mean the same thing, but for me, I tend to kind of say chatbot is maybe like your step one, like fast entry point, and virtual agent starts to have levels of customization that allow, like, as you're thinking through your process and you think about wanting to put more things automatically through your process, you'll do more and more around the lines of a virtual agent. And I'm happy to send all of you, I'm going to actually put my email in here right now. So any of you are welcome to ping me, and I am happy to give you anything that I can be helpful with on our work. All right, so this is one of my favorite examples because I think it's a really good example of that idea of where automated information or kind of confidence of information matching, and like where people are just good at what they do and you can't replace that, right? So particularly, we were working with the patent office, and for many of you, you probably have either yourselves or you have a lot of people who are experts at things, right? And like whether, I know that I go to, for example, to my local DMV, and the woman who sees me way too often there, she's been there for 30 years. She knows exactly how to solve something, exactly what, goes forward. You can't replace that. And similarly, a patent officer has an incredible amount of experience by the time they get to that role of really deciding whether or not someone's going to get a patent. And what I think is really important about this is, again, think about, as public servants, we have these moments where we really are interacting with someone's life journey, right? So for a patent officer, think about like when someone files a patent, right? Think about how excited they are, like the hope, the fact that they think that they've really, done something that might be game changing or a huge part of their future. And so you can imagine there's actually a lot of pressure on a patent officer to make the right call, right? And so what was happening though is that patent officers, in order to kind of put that case together and to be able to defend the case if they choose to issue a patent or not, they've got to do a lot of research, right? They've got to be looking at, what already exists, how close is this? There's a lot of searching. And so in essence, what they found is about 80+% of their time was used searching for information to put together these cases. And 20% or less of their time, were spent actually deciding whether or not someone should be awarded a patent. And so what we did, is, remember, AI is a learning tool, right? And so what we did is we matched the AI up with a patent examiner. And what that means is that the patent examiner, like the AI, it's going to sound creepy, but I promise it's not, kind of the system watches what the patent officer does. So in other words, what do they search for? What information do they accept or not accept, right? They're taking all of those parameters and they're learning. And this is kind of supervised learning. And what's important is the patent examiner can kind of say, oh, you got that one right, or you got that one wrong. So, for these more sophisticated things, there is this kind of learning matching. But ultimately, what ended up happening is the fact that we were able to flip that more, or at least get it on its journey there. So right now, the machine can, in essence, provide about 70 to 90% of actually the same information the patent examiner would have done over their time period. And then the patent examiner can spend more time, looking at it, reviewing it, and deciding it. So I think what's really exciting to me about this is I kind of call it AI for burnout, right? Because it's not like the workload is going down on any of you, on any of your teams, and it's not like the talent pool is increasing. As we all know, it's hard to hire people right now, right? It's a low unemployment rate. And so really thinking about how can AI lessen the pain, right? How can AI make someone's life easier, make it so they're spending their time in a way they enjoy more? That's really the way we should be thinking about and asking. Oh, sorry, Beth. Yeah, I will. Let me see how I scroll out. Let's see. It didn't let me do it.
Whatever you just did, there you go.
Oh, perfect. I don't know. All right, so the last part here, thanks for drawing attention to that. What I think is really interesting about the patent case, and forgive me, I brought up my chat, which is what's doing that. But if you think about it, that same research, and this is where thinking about our processes in new ways that meet the information flow or the technology, that same search that a patent officer does and has now trained the computer to, someone could actually, someone who wanted to get a patent could potentially do that themselves, right? Meaning if they put that AI to be public facing, I could be really excited about my invention, but it might be hard for me to see if something like it really exists. It's a lot to navigate. But if I could move that to the front end and kind of say, oh, actually, it's probably fairly unlikely I'd get one because these 10 things already exist. Also think about how much time, right, we're saving someone or allowing them to understand maybe a tweak they want to make, et cetera. So again, I think this idea of once you have a living and learning system that learns along with you, you can have it in-house, or maybe behind your closed doors, so to speak. But then as it is getting better and better, as it provides value, you can also surface it, in front to constituents or citizens or others where that information might actually be helpful to them earlier in their journey. So I think that's a really exciting place that, we hope to see that go. Now, here's some great examples. These are all like different federal cases that I worked on. But what I want to highlight for you here, document AI, right? So what document AI is simply the idea of, imagine when you look at someone's driver's license, it has information on it, right? It has your name, maybe the issue date, the state. It's really an information form. And so all document AI does is look at that and extract that information and put it in a system, that's useful. But one of the things I want to call out for you all here is that there's so much work that's already been done on what we would call parsers. So parser is in essence that algorithm that can look at a driver's license and pull off, the information specific to a driver's license. There are thousands of parsers already created. And why I tell you that and why that's important is because, for example, if you wanted to make a more automated DMV or other type of application process where you're using a driver's license, a passport, things like that, the technology and the code is already written for you to extract those things. And what that means is that you don't have to pay or reinvest or take the time, to create something with AI that already exists. And so this is why what's exciting is the more and more different groups in public service start using AI, the more they actually make it less expensive for other people to use some of the same parsers, right? So when we, in essence, can extract from a driver's license for one customer, we don't need to recharge other customers. Like that already exists and is created, right? So the more you have common documents or rely on common documents, actually the easier, faster, and less expensive it is to use these technologies. Let's see. Absolutely, Rudy, that's a great point. And this is actually this idea of, I know as for me as a public steward, one of the things you're always asking yourself is, how do I be as responsible as possible with taxpayer dollars, right? How am I making sure that the best investment kind of goes the best place? And that's one of the things where we see people kind of lean in, again, to AI. Now, this one's kind of hard to see, and I won't play it because I think it won't let me. But one of the other things that has been really interesting about AI is being able, for example, to understand bias or where there is human limitation. So in this particular example, you can't see it well, but this is actually a surfer, and he's in a surf competition. And in essence, if you can imagine many competitions like this, gymnastics, ice skating, things that are fast moving, judges often have either subconscious or bias, or just their eyes can't keep up with some of the rapid motions. And so, for example, that teachable machine platform that I showed you earlier, where you could model, whether your niece is dancing like Beyonce, that pose movement is the same thing we used here. And so if I played it, it would show a surfer kind of coming up and kicking at the top of the wave and going down. That's a particular type of move that gets a particular type of points. And so what in essence it does is, by the computer watching along with the judge, if the judge misses something, the computer's like, I think they did an alley-oop, or I think they did this thing, like, are you sure you didn't see that? And so you can imagine this became very interesting when you talk about the Olympics and you talk about judging and you talk about Russia gymnasts versus us versus China, like a lot of interesting ways that technology is used to kind of say, hey, like, what really happened? Did we all see the same thing, et cetera. Oh, Jagan, I would love to talk with you more about AI. So please, let's chat more. All right, so that's another example. And again, I'm just giving you a few of these so that you can get a sense of just how prolific it actually is. This is a very busy slide, but one that I absolutely love on a couple levels. So the first example is this idea of asset inspection. So for some of you, you're going to have, things where your government agency has to maintain things, right? Whether that's maintenance or other types of elements. And I'll show you in a minute, but one of the things that's really interesting, if you see those big windmills, what AI does is actually we fly drones up 300 plus feet in the air, and it can see if a screw is loose on a windmill, right? Like, so think about not making people go up 300 feet in the air, and things like that, to just be able to, do that rotation. Or for example, photo inspection, fleet management. The one on the right is really interesting. This was actually, and I'll come back to that question, Brenda, it's a good one. This is actually pothole detection. And so what we saw with the city of Memphis is we put some cameras on buses, and the cameras were able to completely map, right, all the potholes. We also see this used for like blight or, maybe buildings that aren't being maintained or things like that. But the idea of, again, being able to bring that information flow to bear, kind of more front of mind. And Brenda, I think, to your point of what AI was missed in the judging, I think the question is not so much that the AI should determine the winner, right? It's just to make sure that the judge really knows all of the moves or all of the things that transpired, so that they actually have all the information. Imagine if you're on the beach, you're watching surfers, a grain of sand gets in your eye for 1 minute, you miss something, right? And all of a sudden people want to understand, where your results are coming from, things like that. And I promise I will wrap up. We talked about cybersecurity already. Again, I want you to think about, without AI, we're processing billions of pieces of information, analyzing data super fast. This was an interesting one. So for the city of Seattle, one of the things, of course, that happens is that you think about the use of streets, right? So there might be construction projects, filming, marathons, all of these different things happening. And in essence, by putting those information flows in the AI could predict and flag when was the right time, or when there might be a conflict between, those types of activities. Another one I love, and I play this for you, but I'm worried it might not work from a sound standpoint, is NOAA had more than, I think, 170,000 hours of humpback whale sounds. right? And no one is going to sit there. I mean, I don't know, maybe Graham, maybe you'd volunteer to listen to 170,000 hours of humpback whales, but I would not. And so what they were able to do is use sound-based AI to model the whales. And now they can, in essence, track humpback whales around the world, including in some cases, individual pods, simply based on this sound mapping, right? So that again, some of us in our organizations have huge amounts of historical data. Maybe it's trapped in paper, right? Maybe it's in a different form. Maybe it's video footage. But that idea of being able to unlock that, right, and look forward. And new, I see there are Google buses that track every birthday area. Is that AI? Yeah, I will get you more whale music if you like that, Judith. But yeah, I mean, anytime you're in essence capturing information flow. So for example, like Google, like, you know, street cam, right? We're taking in data at any given time around, you know, what a map looks like, what the geographical terrain, et cetera. And I'll give you an example of where that comes into play. Oh, the whales want to play a sound. We're going to scoop that. So this is actually a great example of that idea of how this might come into play. So, you know, for those of you in California, I know, you know, unfortunately, you've been plagued by a lot of wildfire, right? So this is a great example of, you know, the ability to take in those information streams to be able to understand early fire detection. Also to, you know, for those of you who are in that state might have seen like the Google map that in essence showed you or predicted where fire was moving, where it might be going, exit routes, but also being able to just step back and say, wow, we have not had as much, you know, rain as we thought, but more importantly, these areas are over vegetated and likely to be, you know, when we think about prediction, where fire might be likely to break out. Right. So again, these are a lot of different levels of data, but by weaving them together, and the example specifically of like the Google Street Map is in particular fires. One of the things, unfortunately, when they've gone through a community, some of you may be aware of the fact that, you know, someone can apply for, I think it's FEMA assistance, right, or insurance assistance right after fire if their home's been destroyed. But that can take a lot of time. That's a lot of information that's kind of proving that you've had the damage, you know, that you think. And what actually we could do with the Google Street View cameras and the satellites is be able to confirm instantly, yes, unfortunately and tragically, this home was lost, and instantly file for that person a claim, right? So you're talking about potentially taking, you know, months of bureaucratic process, you know, into a matter of seconds, minutes, you know, days at most, but most importantly, putting all of the evidence for all of the parties in one place simultaneously, right? So that idea again of information flow, the right information at the right time is critical. This wasn't actually, that last one was an example of rust. So we actually can use drones to do rust prediction on ships. And the last one I'll give you, if you think about, if you like food tech, we have these things now where literally these buggies go around and they just take constant photos of every plant, almost every leaf. And so a farmer can know instantly if I have an outbreak of, you know, aphids or locusts or something like that over in this corner, or something needs more water. So if you imagine that the ability to prioritize our resources and catching things when they happen, you can imagine that again, a yield increase when it comes to our national food, you know, supply chain of a 2% increase or a 5% increase is critical. So final thing I will leave you all with is when you think about using AI, you in essence have to have four things. You got to have people. So you got to know what you want. Someone there has to understand what they're trying to solve. You got to have the data. Again, it doesn't have to be perfect. Like I showed you, tumbler picture, vitamin picture. You got to have the compute. So we talked about cloud. And then ultimately the tools, right? So whether that's a technology that Google has or another, you know, provider, really that idea of being able to bring those four things together. Now, what I think is really important is thinking about these kind of four elements. So the first is you really want to pick the right use case. Again, as I mentioned, one of the things that is just a really great place to start with AI is where's the pain, right? Where are your people overwhelmed? Where is it under optimized? The second is building the project team. The third is really understanding what are you trying to do, right? Like what does success look like? And then finally, you know, putting the usability requirements together. As I mentioned, and I think this is really important, you can do AI with both structured and unstructured data. And this is really important because sometimes you have a lot of great information, but you don't know what it's telling you. You don't know how to use it, right? And so really the fact that AI can help you navigate that, again, remember, I didn't tell them what the Tumblr was. I didn't tell them any of that. It was able to kind of interpret. So sometimes AI gives you really unique insights to your data that you weren't even looking for. And then the last thing I would leave you all with is when you think about AI, a lot of people say this is science stuff. This is like for data scientists. But what I wanted to show you with the blue is that the main users of AI right now are just like you and me, right? They are government, they're business, they have particular missions, they're banks, like it's not actually kind of rarefied air. It's kind of, in essence, coming into play into everything that we do. So you all have been amazing. I completely verbally hemorrhaged on you, but hopefully, this made AI a little easier to understand. I'm happy to stay after and take questions or hear from you all. But please let me know in the chat if your original, knowledge of AI was here. Have I helped you like 1 point increase, 2 point increase? You're super comfortable. Please do give me some constructive feedback. But thank you all so much. Hey, +2. Awesome. Well, it was so nice meeting you all. And again, you have my email if I can be helpful to your particular case. Thank you so much. Yay, Beth, 1 to 5. Woohoo!
And just a few reminders, we'll send out some notes and survey and link to whale sounds tomorrow. And also we'll include Alexis's email and anything else that was shared during the presentation. So Alexis, thank you so much for joining us and sharing such a wonderful, engaging presentation.
Well, thank you. And thank you for being public servants because we really need you. So thanks all so much.
Okay, sounds good.